There are a million different methods and strategies to decluttering your home, and many of them can be so helpful. However, if you've been decluttering for a while, you probably recognized pretty quickly that it definitely feels like declutter methods and strategies are not a one-size-fits-all approach. So today, I'm going to break down some of the most popular declutter methods out there so you can determine which one is going to help you the most. So the really quick disclaimer before I dive into these methods really quickly is that it's less about the system and more about consistency. So I'm going to throw quite a few different methods at you, but don't pick one that you can't be consistent with, which is probably one of the biggest reasons a lot of methods just fall flat for some people. So keep that in mind. Ultimately, if we are choosing a system we can't be consistent with, we're going to fail every single time. And I think the more negative part of that beyond failing is typically that tips us into this really negative cycle of failure and shame, and that tends to keep us stuck. So I want to start off with one of my favorite methods by yours truly. So this is going to be a brand new method unless you're a follower of mine. If you are, this is going to be a really great refresher. So this one is called the space method. So I actually have a lot of different methods I teach my students, but this by far is one of my most well-loved and most used from literally thousands of students over the years. So I love acronyms. If you've been following me for a while, you know that. So SPACE, as you can imagine, is an acronym. So the S in SPACE stands for set your physical boundary and set your physical limitation, in other words. So our home is a physical boundary for our stuff, but within our four walls and roof, we have rooms, we have shelves, we have cabinets, we have closets, we have all these little nooks and crannies. And when we don't set physical limitations for different categories of things, clothing, purses, shoes, kids' clothes, toys, like you name it, it's going to tend to overflow because there's no limitation on it. And one big reason people struggle with clutter to begin with is because they never consider what physical limitation or boundary that they have in place. So things just continue to accumulate, and before we know it, there's just too much, way too much. Now, what's really cool, once you set your physical limitation, and let's just use an example of a dresser for clothes, right? That's a physical limitation. And so what you would say is, if my clothes begin to overflow from this dresser, that means something has to go, right? Your brain goes to, well, I clearly need to edit, versus what you might have done in the past, which is just throw clothes on top of your dresser, maybe go out and buy a second dresser, or take space from your husband's closet like I did. So it also helps you keep your clutter in check, and it is the most important thing you could probably ever do on your declutter journey. P stands for purpose. Does everything have a current purpose in this cabinet, drawer, shelf, closet? You get the idea. Ask yourself this one question. You're not going to ask yourself, did this have a purpose 6 months ago, 6 years ago, 6 days ago? If you have not been using it over the last few months, it does not deserve space in your home. And if you need a little more support, then you're going to move into A. So A stands for assess. You are going to put a guideline in place right now for yourself, or maybe after this video, that you can use to help negate all those questions. This could come in handy. What if I need this in the future? All the questions everybody asks themselves and stops us in our track, usually in our journey. And it's going to help negate those questions, those objections, those roadblocks that have stopped you in the past. So a lot of my students' go-to rule here is setting their 2020 rule or their own variation. If you haven't heard of the 2020 rule, it is this: if I can replace this for less than $20 and in less than 20 minutes, I'm going to let this go. Now, everyone has different lifestyles, different finances. So that's what's really cool here. You're not using someone else's rule, Joe Schmo's rule, the minimalist rule, Katie Wells rule. You're going to make a rule that makes you feel good, that you feel good with. Now, if you live in a place that has Targets or Walmarts or businesses around the corner in less than 20 minutes drive, like a lot of my students do, you're going to drop that 20-minute rule because it's just accessible. So you can change the dollar amount. Some people go 15, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It can literally be whatever you want it to be, but you have to be disciplined and actually follow it. So if you can replace it for less than $30, then you're going to let it go. That's what you're going to stick to. I also have students add a year onto it. So if I can replace this for less than $20 and I haven't used it since 2022, so it's 2023 now, so that's over a year. That's well enough time that you could have used it by now. Then I'm going to let it go. So you can add things to it. You can take things away. Whatever you do, make it your own and be disciplined. And then that takes you to C, which stands for choose. You are going to choose what to do with it. And this is where, believe it or not, most people just drop the ball snowball because procrastination kicks in. Maybe you have a difficult, time making a decision, or hopefully with the acronym so far, you feel pretty good. But regardless, you have to choose what to do with it. Are you going to donate it? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to put it in your maybe bin if you have a maybe bin for things you're just not quite sure about? Are you going to keep it? If so, are you going to keep it where it is right now on this shelf or on this cabinet? Or are you going to put it in a different spot in your home? Whatever that means here, you have to choose and follow through with it. And E stands for end cycle, which is just a fancy way of saying completely get it out of your house. 99.9% of people spend so much time bagging and boxing their clutter up, but what happens? They toss it in their trunk, they drive around with it in their trunk for 3 months, or it sits in their passenger seat and they have to take it in and out of their car. Maybe it sits in your garage, your basement, or just flat out in your living room. All the while it's calling out to you that you need to finish the project, right? If the project isn't finished, that creates a lot of mental clutter. And there tends to be a lot of resistance. I've felt this resistance when it comes to end cycling. Feels kind of like a pain to have to drive it to a donation center, find people to donate it to, all the things. But that last 5% is so rewarding once you get the clutter completely out of your house. You gain that physical space back. And as you know, that equates to mental headspace you gain back at the same time. It doesn't mean you have to declutter your entire home at once and just be done. That's not realistic all in one sitting for most people. But as you start to accumulate 1, 2, 3 bags, make a solid effort and put a few minutes of intention into scheduling a drop off, a pickup, or delegating it to a family member to take care of. I promise you will feel so much better getting those bags out of your house. So the pros to this method are you can really apply it toward any category of things. You can use it at your discretion. I consider this, and my students really enjoy it because it's a pretty well-rounded approach. And what's really cool is it can not only help you declutter, but it helps you maintain, which is half the battle, I think, when it comes to decluttering. It can be easy to declutter, but even more difficult to maintain it on the back end. The con, it definitely takes some mental bandwidth and consideration and focus to answer some of those questions, like creating your 20/20 rule and setting those physical limitations on the front end. But I promise you that saves time on the back end, so much time, and it's going to save you a lot of energy too. Let's talk about Pinterest lists. This is the next one. So if you're either really ruthless at decluttering or have a strong declutter muscle, and maybe you've been decluttering for a long time, if you love details and operate really well with checklist, this can be a great method for you. The pros are it's very pragmatic. It's to the point. It's just super simplistic. A lot of people really appreciate that. Now, on the flip side of that coin, because it is so basic, right? Step 1, empty your drawers. Step 2, decide what to keep or whatever the checklist says. Because it's so basic, it really doesn't give a lot of people enough support to dig deeper and get the results they're looking for. And I tend to say if checklists solved clutter problems, we wouldn't be here today. You wouldn't be watching this video or listening to my podcast or, looking for information on decluttering. Checklists also don't help with things like we talked about earlier. What if I need this one day? This could come in handy. A lot of those questions that come up, we're just going to kind of blow through and not answer when it comes to a checklist. And if you're anything like me, I had so many Pinterest checklists that were printed. I put them on my cluttered countertops and they ultimately became clutter. I didn't find them to be really motivating to get started. And there are thousands. So it can be really overwhelming to choose the right one for you. But I do think they have their place. The minimalist 90-90 rule. So the 90-90 rule can be really helpful if you tend to be one of those people that just tends to ignore those tougher decisions and procrastinate about those things that could come in handy or could be useful. So all you do is ask yourself 2 different questions as you are decluttering. Number 1, have I used this in the last 90 days? And number 2, if not, do I plan on using it in the upcoming 90 days, right? It's pretty simplistic. The pro is it can really help you let go of things you've been holding on to just in case. And the con is you have to be disciplined with this rule. And you're probably not going to apply it towards things that are sentimental. Swedish death cleaning. I did a podcast on this book a couple years ago that a lot of people loved and appreciated. So if you're a podcast listener of mine, scroll back a year and a half or 2 and find it. But in short, this is based on a great book called The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. And trust me, it's not as depressing or strange as it sounds. So essentially the concept of the book is the author shares that decluttering your possessions, it should be largely due to mortality. The reality is that someone's going to have to deal with our stuff one day. So why not let that be us? And I think a big pro to this different methods she shares within this book is it involves others. Essentially, you're basically creating a will for your things. And especially for things like passwords, banking information, relevant information that your loved ones might need when you're no longer here, you're going to get all of that organized and a lot of the excess decluttered, and they'll have it in one spot for when that time comes. And a lot of people who do this actually feel such a weight lifted off their shoulders. It's almost like a burden they didn't know they had because they don't have to worry when they're not here anymore. While this book is geared for like ages 50 plus, I read it in my early 30s and I still took a lot away from it. So don't shy away if you're not in that 50 plus age group. So the pros, again, for some people like me, the mortality piece really resonated with me and I really felt empowered, and it made me realize I didn't want to burden other loved ones when I'm not here anymore, especially because I have a lot of personal stories from students who've been through that. And maybe you have too. It's hard when you're already grieving and upset and you have all this heartache, and now you have to go through an entire home filled with things, maybe from a loved one, a parent, an in-law, a partner, and you just don't have any clue what was important to them, what they'd like you to keep. And ultimately, it can add so much more stress to an already stressful situation. That can help a lot of people. And also, I think, again, the idea of enlisting others, it's going to be your loved ones in this case, to help you go through these possessions and create that will for your things. The cons are, it tends to be pretty slow moving. And again, if you don't resonate with that theme of mortality and go into the project with that in mind, it's probably not going to be the right fit for you. So the 1 in, 1 out rule. So this actually fits beautifully into my space framework. So remember, the S in space stands for setting your physical boundaries. And as soon as those boundaries start to overflow, this is a great rule to implement. It is exactly how it sounds. When you buy one new thing, out another one goes. And I typically do this by category. And for me personally, I use this in my wardrobe on occasion when my wardrobe is full, not when it's already overflowing, but when I'm like, yeah, like I don't really want to add too much more. So if I buy a new top, I will immediately get rid of a top that's in my closet. A massive pro to this is it's pretty simplistic. It doesn't take a ton of time and it helps prevent buildup and it helps keep you in maintenance mode versus declutter just to reclutter. And it really helps control the flow of things. The con, it can be really easy not to follow through and procrastinate. So if you're like, oh, I can see myself procrastinating about this, my recommendation would be to get that thing out immediately. So as soon as you bring that new top into your wardrobe or your closet or your dresser, pick one thing that has to go. If you procrastinated about it, you probably won't be super disciplined. And before you know it, this rule won't work for you. The KonMari method. I couldn't get through this video without bringing up one of the most popular declutter methods in the world from Marie Kondo's book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. The core principle of her method is instead of focusing on what to get rid of, you're going to focus on what to keep. And then the rest should be fairly easy to declutter. I say fairly like really loosely here because it wasn't for me. So to get started, you're going to collect every single item you own in a particular category and you're going to put them into a big pile. You can put it onto a pile on your bed or on the floor. For example, every single shirt you wear, every single toy that's in your house, every single coat, you're going to put all of these one at a time onto different piles in your bed. And then you're going to pick up each one at a time individually. You're going to hold it. You're going to feel it. If it's clothing, you're going to put it on and wear it. And that gives you a good sense of how you feel when you're wearing that piece of clothing. So while you do this, as you pick up these items or put the items on, you're going to ask yourself, does this item, shirt, shoes, purse, whatever it is, vase, does this bring me joy? Pros are you can make a lot of progress doing this throughout your home, especially in different categories of things. I've had some students who've had a lot of success applying this towards clothing and just different categories of things. It might not work for everything, but you could always test it out on one particular category. I actually did this method back in 2015 when I was looking at my massively overwhelming cluttered closet and piled everything up, as she said. But at the time, because I was a full-time working mom of 2 kids under 2, I did it on a Saturday with my 2 sons in the room with me. One was 1 and one was 2.5. And it was, as you can imagine, extremely challenging. So definitely don't recommend doing that if you don't have to. I spent about 8 hours. I filled up 2 big black trash bags. I didn't even try the majority of things on, believe it or not. I had so much. And honestly, about 20 minutes in, I very quickly fizzled out. And that's another con. It can be time consuming, is that over 20 to 30 minutes, our brains just get overwhelmed, Our brains just tend to get overwhelmed and fatigued, and asking ourselves a question like, does this spark joy, can feel so elusive. So if you've never decluttered before, like I hadn't, this method might not be for you. If you have a stronger declutter muscle, I would say go for it 100%. And because you are pulling things oftentimes from your entire home and putting it in one space, it can potentially uproot your home. And it's kind of one of those things where it looks worse before it gets better. Some people are like, it kind of looks like a bomb went off in my house. I had all these different piles everywhere. If you tend to gravitate toward more structure and guidelines and more of like a foundation, use a space framework, and you can use it in conjunction with some of these other methods, even like the KonMari method. And again, I think we always need to ask ourselves tougher questions. So does it spark joy? Again, it can feel really elusive. Even using the 90-90 method or pulling some inspiration from space could be a lot more fruitful here and help you make more progress. The 4-box method. Pretty simplistic. What you're going to do is you're going to start picking up things in a room that you're decluttering and you're going to put it into one of 4 boxes. The first one is put away, the second give away, the third throw away or recycle, right? Eco-friendly here. And the fourth is maybe. I swear by maybe bins. I think they have their time and place. I remember reading years ago on my declutter journey from a lot of gurus how maybe bins are like horrible. Like, why do you have a maybe bin? You need to decide yes or no right now. But it's not so cut and dry. I think a maybe bin can be great. It should be the exception more than the rule. The rule should probably, most of the things should be going in the donation bin. The maybe bin, I would say the firm boundary I'm going to add here and that you should add if you could have a maybe bin as well. You have to revisit that maybe bin within 4 weeks, even less. 4 weeks max is the timeline. And if you haven't reached for what you put in that maybe bin 4 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, it's got to go. Again, that means being disciplined. But what's really cool is it helps tip you over into feeling more confident about letting go of it. And that extra time and knowing that probably 90% of the time you're going to have completely forgotten what you put in that maybe bin anyway, just tips you over into more logic and feeling good about letting go. So that's my added tip to the maybe bin. The pros to the 4-box method are it can help you just make a decision versus procrastinate. It's straightforward. You really just go at your own pace. The 1 method, as simple as it sounds, you get rid of one thing every single day. The pro is, and this is wildly important, it's going to help you build the habit. So many people focus on like, I just want to get 15 or 20 minutes in a day. It sounds good on paper, but we're all busy people and that can be hard to do in the beginning. So instead you can look for 2 minutes, but even more simple, just look for one thing to get rid of every single day. No matter how busy you are or how crazy your lifestyle is, you can find one thing each day to put in your donation bin. A big pro to this is oftentimes I've noticed when I've done the 1 method, I typically get rid of more than one thing. So the goal is one thing a day. And if you go above and beyond, great. Now the con, it's pretty obvious. You're going to get much slower results. And if you are a perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist like myself, the 1 method can feel excruciatingly slow and painful if you like to do like longer bursts and if you want to like get it all done at one time. Regardless of what method is right for you, there is one thing that is certain. You have to be consistent. If that sounds like a struggle for you, make sure to click the video on your screen now to learn how you can be more consistent, even when you don't feel like it.